For Chapter 1, Concept 4, we're going to talk about multiplying real numbers. We've done adding, we've done subtracting, now we're going to do multiplying, including fractions. Now, in order for you to multiply integers, positive and negative numbers, there's a few things that you need to know. Now, chances are you already know these things, you just don't know what they're called. So let's take a look. The first one is the identity property of multiplication. And what the identity property says is that if you have 4 times 5 and that equals 20, then also 5 times 4 equals 20. Basically, the order doesn't matter. If you have the multiplication property of 0, that says you can have 5 times 0 and that equals 0. Also, 0 times 5 equals 0. Doesn't matter the order, and anything that you multiply by 0 will be equal to 0. So say it with me. Ready? Listen first. Anything multiplied by 0 equals 0. Say it with me. Anything multiplied by 0 equals 0. All right, let's keep going. Next, we have the multiplication property of -1. And basically what this says is if you have any number, say 2, and you multiply by -1, it will change the sign of the original number and it'll be equal to its negative. So likewise, if you have any number, if it starts out as negative and then you multiply it by -1, it'll change the sign of the original. So now your new one is going to be positive. The inverse property of multiplication says if you take a number, any number, and you multiply it by its inverse. Well, what's an inverse? Let's talk about that for a minute. Anytime you see the word inverse or you hear the word inverse, what I want you to think of is reciprocal. And that means flip the fraction. Inverse is a math word. It means the same thing as reciprocal, also a math word. It means to flip the fraction. And what the inverse property of multiplication says, if you take a number and you multiply by its inverse, or by its reciprocal, or by the fraction you get when you flip it, in this case it would be 1/8, because remember, any whole number has a denominator of 1. We don't write it all the time. It's not always going to be there, but it can be there, and it is there. So we can flip it and make it 1/8 instead of 8/1. And if we multiply these two things together, it'll equal 1. Okay? And it works for fractions too. If you take something like 2/3 and you multiply by its inverse or its reciprocal and you flip the fraction, multiply by the inverse, multiply by the reciprocal, then that is going to equal 1 as well. So these are the properties of multiplication. Now let's take a look at what happens when we're dealing with signs. Remember, when you're dealing with signs, there's going to be two options. You're either going to be multiplying things that have the same sign, or you're going to be multiplying things that have different signs. So let's talk about what happens when you have these combinations. Anytime you are multiplying two numbers that have the same sign, like both positive or both negative, they will give you a positive answer. Okay? So for example, if you have positive 2 times positive 2, that will give you positive 4. Likewise, -3 times -2. They have the same sign, so my answer is going to be a positive 6. You can think of it this way. When good things happen to good people, it makes me feel good. When bad things happen to bad people, that makes me feel good too. Now, if you're multiplying numbers with different signs, kind of works the same way in that when good things happen to bad people, that's bad. And when bad things happen to good people, that's bad too. But what does that mean in math? Well, anytime you're multiplying numbers with different signs, it will always give you a negative answer. So let's take a look. Let's say you have a positive 2 times a negative 4. Well, positive times a negative will always give you a negative, so it's -8. And if you have -3 times a positive, I don't know, 5. Well, a negative times a positive gives me a negative, so it's -15. Again, good things that happen to bad people makes me feel bad. And when bad things happen to good people, that makes me feel bad too. So just something to help you remember your signs for multiplication. So let's take a look at what this looks like in action. The first thing that you want to do when you're dealing with multiplication is just take a look at your signs. See what signs you're dealing with. So here I have a negative times a positive. I know that my answer, because these are different signs, my answer will be negative. Negative times a negative, they're the same, my answer will be positive. Negative times negative, the signs are the same, my answer will be positive. Negative times a positive, they're different, so my answer will be negative. Once you get your signs situated, then all you have to do is the multiplication. You have 8 times 10, 80. 3 times 7, 21. 10 times 6, 60. 4 times 8, 32. Now, I want you to pause the video and do these on the right-hand side on your own. Remember to do the sign first and then the multiplication. And if you're struggling with your multiplication, then just know we are going to be working on that this year. We're going to start doing some speed drills very soon, because multiplication needs to be something that you can do at the snap of a finger anytime. If I say, what's 9 times 7? You need to know that that's 63 super fast without having to stop and figure it out, without even having to take the time to pull out your calculator. So do these the best that you can. If you want to take the time to write out your multiplication tables on a sheet of paper or make a multiplication chart, that would not be a bad idea to have that as a reference. But we'll be working on it. So pause and give it a try. How'd you do? Let's take a look at the next set of numbers. And basically all it says, just like it said in concepts 2 and 3 and even 1, if you have more than just 2 numbers, take it 1 pair at a time. We can do that. But again, if you start out by checking your signs first, you're going to make this so much easier on yourself because you won't even have to worry about the sign, and that's the trickiest part. Here's the rules. If you have 1 negative number in your problem, then your answer is going to be negative. If you have 2 negative numbers, your answer is going to be positive. If you have 3 negative numbers, your answer is going to be negative. Now here's the trick. No matter how big your multiplication problem gets, if you have an odd number of negatives, then it'll end up being negative. If you have an even number of negatives, it will end up being positive. And you'll find that that'll be true forever. So let's do our signs. Here I have 1 negative, so this one will be negative. 1 negative, negative. 2 negatives, this will be positive. 2 negatives, this will be positive. 1 negative, that'll be a negative. And 1, 2, 3 negatives, that'll be a negative as well. Now all I have to do is the actual number multiplication part. And remember, because of the identity property of multiplication, the order that you do this doesn't matter. So if I do it in one way and you're like, whoa, that's really hard to multiply, that's okay. Try multiplying the other 2 numbers and then do the third in a different order. It doesn't matter. 3 times 7 is 21. 21 times 5 is, let's see, 5, 10, 105. 9 times 1 is 9, times 4 is 36. 8 times 5 is 40, times 10 makes it 400. 3 times 3 is 9, times 4 is 36. 5 times 6 is 30, times 9 is 270. And 7 times 4 is 28. Ooh, this one's tricky, so 28 times 7. 7 times 8 is 56. 14 plus 5 is 19, so 196. So there you have it. If you have to stop and do the long multiplication off to the side somewhere, that is perfectly okay. You're welcome to do that. It'll take longer, so you want to get faster, but for now, don't hesitate to do that if you need to. You don't need to do all this multiplication in your head. So yeah, set up your signs, then do your multiplication, and this should be a breeze. Why don't you go ahead and finish the ones on the right?